Okay, sorry about that, guys. That was a little bit of an oopsie. Mm. I'm just rewriting my current list of the top 100 video games I've reviewed. If you want to interrupt me, feel free. I don't have to do this. It's just that I have very low hard drive space, so I figured this was the best way to do it because it's stored on the cloud. 100 bucks, boy plus box girl. 99. Another lost phone. Laura's story. Number 98. Gamma Sam. Don't fear the dark. Number 97. Spy Fox in dry cereal. And then number 96 is Super Mario 64. Okay, there we go. So, Super Mario 64, as I was saying, at the time that I first played it, it seemed like a huge sandbox style. Whoa, I can just run around, do whatever I want, run up the hill. Sure, there were restrictions, but at the time, who cared? It also had this really like almost dreamlike music. The steel guitar that Koji Kondo used for a lot of. I think I'm gonna put the computer on my chair so that it's not so wobbly. Does that sound better to you guys? I don't want to lose people just because I'm trying to be comfortable, but I also have to be accommodating as well. Where am I going to put my water? All right, let's see here. There we go. All right, let's move all this over here. All this. Whoa, that was a close one. All right. Whoa. Whoa. Okay, well, I guess that'll do. So, Super Mario 64, I played it on both the Nintendo 64 and the Virtual Console. I gotta say, it feels much more natural playing it on the Nintendo 64. Maybe it's because of muscle memory, but you'd think because the Virtual Console version has a joystick, you'd be able to fully rotate the camera. It doesn't fix the camera issues at all. So if you can get it on Nintendo 64, that's definitely the preferred way to do it at the moment. But if you can't, well, the Virtual Console version is not going to kill you. Just this video might be updated sometime or another in the future, and that's never fun. So, number 95, Kirby Star Allies. If anyone thinks I'm the Kirby hater, well, wait till you see how many Kirby games I have on this list. Star Allies isn't particularly mind-blowing for a Kirby game. I mean, the main concept is you can have 3 other buddies that are battling it out with you. Kirby Superstar, well, Kirby Superstar, Kirby's Dream Land 2, and Kirby's Dream Land 3 had systems similar where you could have a partner, but now you can have 3 at a time, which also isn't a revolutionary idea because Kirby's Return to Dreamland did that. It's just that in that game, you had to wait until you had other people around. Otherwise, you could only play as Kirby. Whereas in this, the entire game, even if you're playing single player, revolves around multiple characters running around on the screen at once. The game looks really good. It's the first main Kirby game in HD. The first actual Kirby game in HD was Kirby and the Rainbow Curse for the Wii U, but that game had its problems. This is a more traditional Kirby Superstar-esque platformer that is also insanely easy, which is why I put it as the lowest rated of the Kirby games that I've reviewed, because you can just breeze through anything you want almost on autopilot. Like, the AI is a little too good to be true. Now, ever since I reviewed that game, there have definitely been a humongous amount of patches and updates, including a whole new mode called Heroes of Another Dimension. So if I ever decided to re-rent that game, I might bump it up a little bit higher, because I did not play it after all the updates were finished. They also added a lot of Dream Friends, which, you know me, I love games based on nostalgia. So it's not a bad game. I mean, it even brings back the combination of copy abilities from Kirby 64. It's just a very easy game, and I don't like it when games are stiflingly hard, but when they're stiflingly easy, that can be just as frustrating. So now number 94, Kirby's Return to Dreamland. Oh, let me. So Kirby's Return to Dreamland is basically the Wii counterpart to Kirby Star Allies. It came out in 2010. It was it was pretty hype when it first came out, because it was the first time we had seen a traditional Kirby side-scrolling game since Kirby 64 on the Nintendo 64, which came out in 2000. So 10 years passed since then. Although I guess fans would argue that was 2.5D. So I guess in that case, it would be since Kirby's Dream Land 3 for the Super Nintendo. What makes Kirby's Return to Dreamland better, in my opinion, is that it's much more challenging. It's still not a Lost Levels level of challenging, but it still required you to like use some patient and precise platforming, especially if you wanted to 100% the game. It had a multiplayer mode where you could play as Kirby, King Dedede, Meta Knight, and Waddle Dee, and they each had their own special abilities, although to my understanding, none of them had abilities that Kirby couldn't get himself in the main game if he just got the right copy ability. The game also looks pretty gorgeous. Maybe it's because I've downloaded the Virtual Console version of it, but it's a treat to look at. Also, the Wii Remote held sideways proves to be a really good method. Also, shaking the Wii Remote to make Kirby do a super inhale is pretty genius. The Ultra abilities, where Kirby like pulls out a gigantic sword to cut through the environment, or a humongous hammer to pound down a switch, they don't happen often, but they're pretty fun when they do. It doesn't feel particularly like a Wii game per se. I mean, it's called Kirby Wii in Korea. Did they run out of titles or something? And it does actually have a pretty neat ending. Apart from that, it's a pretty harmless Kirby game. Hey, greetings! It's been a long time since I've seen you. Where have you been? All right, so the next game on my list is another Kirby game. Honestly, a lot of them feel the same, so that's why they're so close together on this list. So next up, we have Kirby Triple Deluxe. I was actually playing this for the most part concurrently with Return to Dreamland. So there were a lot of similarities. Maybe I didn't give this game a fair enough try, but I liked it slightly better than Return to Dreamland because it had a lot of emphasis on jumping between the foreground and the background with some of the warp stars, and the supernova ability, which is where Kirby like inhales so much that the entire environment can get inhaled into his mouth. It felt like that was more cleverly used for puzzles, whereas the super abilities were more of just like, let's destroy everything in sight, which is, I guess, not as good for appealing to the female audience. Not to say females don't like destroying stuff, but generally speaking, that's more of a testosterone field deal to want to destroy everything in sight. Getting married. Congratulations, Taylor. Wow. Good to know you've progressed quite a lot since I last talked to you. Very nice. Congratulations. What do you plan on naming the baby? Plus, Triple Deluxe also had mini games that inspired their own 3DS spin-offs called Kirby Fighters Deluxe and Dedede's Dream Dash Deluxe, which were okay. But it's still neat that they had standalone releases because the minigames were so good. Next up is a pretty, yeah, you probably saw this coming, but yet another Kirby game, Kirby Planet Robobot, which is also for the 3DS. So when I first picked it up, I thought this is going to be insanely similar to Triple Deluxe. And while it does use the same engine as that game and Return to Dreamland, one thing that makes Planet Robobot set apart is it actually has a setting. Now, the other Kirby games have mostly just been ho-hum, just run around the worlds, but Planet Robobot was more or less the Super Mario Sunshine of the 3DS era. Basically, everything is machines. So that means there are robotic versions of familiar enemies. There's a lot of Julius David. I approve of the name of David because that's my middle name. Very nice. And if it's a girl, And so you could also jump inside Robobot armor. And then Kirby would be able to become a robot, and then he could scan enemies and get even more copy abilities. So he essentially doubled the amount of abilities he could steal from enemies. It also had a nice rockin' metallic soundtrack, which normally I don't like, but Planet Robobot somehow made it work. And it had a super cool final boss. So it's definitely one of the best Kirby games, but not the best. Got to get a lot farther along in this live stream. Next up is a title I still do not know how to pronounce. VVVVVV, or as I like to call it, VV. I actually think it's supposed to be upside down spikes. Renee Grace. I had a sister that was miscarried that probably would have been named Grace had she survived. So I do like that name. That's pretty neat. V6, to sort of abbreviate it so I don't keep getting tongue-tied, is a game that was mostly made by one guy, Terry Kavanagh, with I think like one other guy to help him with the music. It looks like an Atari game, and it sounds very retro in its sound design, but it's a very, very hard platformer with one gimmick, and that's you press a button to reverse gravity. So you essentially flip up and down from the ceiling and the floor. And you get killed in one hit, so you have to be extremely precise. However, what makes the game doable for someone that might be like, ah, too much, is it has multiple difficulty settings, even the ability to turn yourself invincible, slow down the game's speed, make the game harder, and the checkpoints are placed very generously. So you usually don't have to worry about repeating too many things that you already did. Plus, it's an open world platformer. So you get this huge world map that you keep constantly trying to fill in. So it's actually a joy to try to 100% it. It has a storyline. It's not a particularly great one. You basically just have to find all of your shipmates because you were in a rocket ship and then you all crashed on this strange planet. And that's about it. It's still a really simple, fun game. It just recently released on the Switch. When I reviewed it, it was only on the 3DS. So what are you waiting for? Download it. Should be a pretty cheap price, too, considering that it's an indie game. Speaking of indie games, the next one on the list is Brawlhalla, which is essentially Super Smash Bros. Ultimate for those without a budget. So this is a free-to-play 2D fighting game. I reviewed it on the Nintendo Switch, but I believe it's also on PC and Xbox, if I'm not mistaken. Recently, they've added quite a lot of support for it, with characters like Shovel Knight and Rayman joining the battle. Most of the soundtrack is orchestrated. The backgrounds are very colorful, even if they aren't as imaginative as Ultimate. Essentially, going into this game, there was a lot of, well, Smash on the Switch is going to be better than this. But if you took it as, if you can't afford the $60 price tag of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Brawlhalla's free. How do you beat that? Granted, you have to pay for some of its DLC, but even in the base game, it still has an impressive amount of characters and stages. And you have the gimmick of switching between whether you want to use a weapon or whether you just want to use your fists, which is pretty neat. I mean, it's kind of like the Shulk before Shulk really became a thing. And the controls work fine. Wall jumping works way better in this game than it did in Smash. But if you already have Smash, you probably can just say, I don't need Brawlhalla. But it was a good way to pass the time until Ultimate was announced. Number 89, Sonic Forces. This is the kind of game that I highly doubt anyone expected on a top 100 games I've reviewed list. Then again, I've reviewed some pretty garbage games. I liked Sonic Forces way better than most people did. For one, there were a lot of people that complained that the Switch version was the worst version because it only ran at 30 frames per second instead of 60. Honestly, I didn't even notice the difference. It still looked gorgeous, especially the grass effects. I would say the grass effects are even better in that game than they are in a lot of Nintendo's first-party offerings lately. The 2D stages with classic Sonic, they may not have controlled as well as Sonic Mania's did, but they were still a lot of fun, a lot of great callbacks to classic Sonic 3 and Knuckles stages that I really enjoyed. The modern Sonic stages were, albeit pretty easy, you usually just blasted through most of them, but they had a lot of cinematic flair. Like you felt like you were both watching a movie and playing a game at the same time. The storyline was really intense and epic. Basically, Dr. Robotnik's trying to take over the world, and you have to form an army to try to like take back the globe. They also removed the live system, which is really neat because you can die as many times as you want and it won't kick you back to the end of the level. Checkpoints probably could have been better placed, but at least you don't get game overs anymore. So that was neat. You can create your own character, which I didn't really care much about, but I know a lot of Sonic, a lot of diehard Sonic fans have been creating Sonic avatars for years now. So that for them should be a dream come true. And you can even choose what ability you want, and that'll affect how far you progress through the story because there's like multiple routes you can take through the levels. So if your avatar, say, has a fire spewer, then you can take this route. But if you choose your avatar to have a block placer, then you go through this route. At times the game can be pretty slow, but then again, the earliest Sonic game was as slow as molasses. So don't be a hypocrite now. Next up, we have Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn at number 88. So this is far from being epic, but still a pretty great game. It's an enhanced port of a Wii game called Kirby's Epic Yarn that came out in 2010. This was the final first-party 3DS game to be released by Nintendo, unless they pull something out of nowhere in 2020, which I highly doubt. Basically, it's a slightly graphically downgraded version of the Wii game, but it adds a couple of features which are honestly not that great, but they still make it better than the Wii version, in my opinion. For starters, ditching the motion controls and making everything button-oriented, for better or for worse. There's a section where you have to draw train tracks, but you can't use the stylus, which is bizarre. But on the other hand, it does add a devilish mode, which actually allows Kirby to take damage. Because a lot of people criticize the Wii version for making it impossible to die. You just lose beads, which are basically the currency you use to decorate your pad. And then with the devilish mode, not only can you only take 4 hits and then you're kaput. Ha, nice. Well, I appreciate the invite for sure. I'm not sure if I'll make it or not because weddings kind of make me anxious, but I very much appreciate that you're willing to invite me. That's very nice. Thank you very much. I don't know why my shoulder feels so sore today. So, Extra Epic Yarn being on the 3DS was just a lot more convenient. I could play it wherever I wanted. Sure, it didn't look as great as Epic Yarn, but the whole like everything is made out of yarn aesthetic was still really well done. I really liked the ravel abilities that were added. That was scandalous to fans of the original version who were like, but Paul, that was a Kirby game where you didn't inhale copy abilities. Yeah, that's boring. I know it's more strategic that way, but it's also more boring. And if you have the amiibos, then you can get the ravel abilities as much as you want. So essentially, what I loved about Kirby Superstar was that I could, bash enemies with a sword. And if I lost it, I'd be like, shoot, maybe I should have plan that out more strategically. In Extra Epic Yarn, just keep tapping the Meta Knight amiibo as much as you want, and you can keep getting the sword. They also added 2 more mini games, one where you play as Meta Knight and get to slash everything in sight, and another where you play as King Dedede in auto-running stages similar to the Poochie Dash stages in the 3DS remake of Yoshi's Woolly World, which will appear later on this list, if I can keep this going long enough. Extra Epic Yarn's not exactly the hardest game on the planet, but it is very charming. It has very soothing, relaxing piano music, charming narration, and overall just a more lighthearted approach to platforming. Number 87. Good luck if anyone has played this, because this game seems to have slipped out of everyone's radar. Trace Memory for the DS. There was actually a sequel on the Wii, but it was never released in North America, which is a shame because this was a genius game. I would have been surprised if this was a tech demo for the DS because it showed off a lot of the DS's horsepower in ways that not even the 3DS could compare to. Basically, you took control of a 13-year-old girl named Ashley Robbins, and she goes to Blood Edward Island to try to investigate the disappearance of her father. And in the process, she is given this thing called a DTS, which literally, I think I have a prop here, literally looks like the original model of the Nintendo DS. So not only are you seeing the game on 2 screens, but you're also using your own DS to use her DTS. So one of the prime things you could do is you could take pictures, and you could take pretty much unlimited pictures. I mean, the game doesn't have that much scenery, so if you do run out of photo space, you really don't need to worry about that. And you can juxtapose 2 pictures together, and sometimes you can find clues when you put them together, like say one half of the picture and another half make a number, and then you use that number to get through a gate. Also, if say Ashley has to push something out of the way, you'd have to like use your stylus to push it, but the game adds touch resistance. You have to try to push it out of the way realistically. Like, how would you actually try to push a rock? How would you actually try to scrape rust off of a rusty sign? So there's a lot of items that you could use, and the items have very convincing physics. They use the DS in so many incredible ways that I don't even want to tell you the solutions to most of the puzzles. Like, you really have to think outside the box. Thankfully, Ashley is not alone. Shortly after you get to Blood Edward Island, you meet a ghost named Dee. And apparently Dee's been dead for like 50 years, and Ashley's the only person that could see him. So she and this ghost work together to try to recover his memories, because the only thing he remembers is that his first name started with a D. So you can get a hidden ending if you go out of your way to help Dee remember who he is, although for some reason the game glitches out and sometimes will still give you the bad ending even if you didn't recover all the memories, which is weird. It does have a New Game Plus, but it's not particularly impressive. Honestly, this game has really terrible replay value. It's also really short, but thankfully it's fairly challenging. Fairly challenging, but not too unfair, because the game gives you good enough hints, but not so much that it's a super guide. If you can track it down, it is not on the Virtual Console, so you might have to go game hunting, but it's a worthy purchase in my opinion. Number 86, Kirby's Dream Collection. This is my list, so I'm allowed to put a collection on there if I want to. This game came out for the Wii in 2012, one of the last first-party games published by Nintendo to be released prior to the release of the Wii U. This had 6 Kirby games on one disc. It had Dreamland 1 through 3, Kirby Superstar, yes, Kirby 64, and Kirby's Adventure. And they all played pretty much like emulations of their original games. You could use a GameCube controller, which was neat. And you could use the GameCube controller properly, because in the original version of Kirby 64, you couldn't use the analog stick. Well, now you can. But in addition to all of the games being preserved for better or for worse in their original state, so Kirby's Adventure still had all those glitches, you also had a museum where you could like go through the history of the Kirby timeline all the way up to 2012. You could watch video footage of every Kirby game, view the box art of every Kirby game. There were episodes of the Kirby anime that you could watch. There were even facts that weren't even related to Nintendo, like for example, when the virtual well, I guess that's a Nintendo related fact. Like, when was the first Olympics held? And it was cool that when you got to an area of the museum that had Kirby stuff that year, Kirby would inhale the information. So I guess you were viewing it from inside of Kirby's stomach. Kind of gross, but kind of cool at the same time. Plus, if you were a fan of Kirby's Return to Dreamland, they had new challenge stages that were based on the copy abilities from that game, and even a room where you could use the abilities from the Super Smash Bros. Series. So overall, it still felt like a game, despite the fact that it was actually a collection, because there was a whole new section that was not based on a game. Plus, the original version came with an art book and a soundtrack CD, of which I got the soundtrack CD, and it had a nice selection of music from throughout Kirby's history. And honestly, the fact that I picked it up so late, I'm surprised the game managed to still have the CD in good condition. Animal Crossing New Leaf Welcome Amiibo is number 85. I specifically say the Welcome Amiibo part in there because that was actually it was originally planned as a free update to New Leaf after the travesty that was Amiibo Festival, and Nintendo, I guess, wanted to get the Animal Crossing series back to their prime. But then they also released a standalone physical version where it had the update already pre-installed on the card so that you didn't have to go through a lengthy loading screen. Essentially, New Leaf's big twist to the formula is that if you were the first player that moved into the town, you got to be the mayor. So just to name a few abilities, you could make more bridges if you had trouble getting across the rivers. You could set up ordinances so that, say, if you were a night owl, the shops would remain open for longer. You could set it so that the town would have less weeds. You could set it so that the animals were more social. You could essentially make it more of like a Sims type of Animal Crossing game. The game also is one of the first Animal Crossing games to radically think about changing the art direction. It didn't do much, but it like made the villagers actually tall and thin. So I guess slightly more realistically proportioned. Previously, they felt more like the model of Mario and Super Mario 64, which I get there are some people like that, but the fact that you couldn't change your proportions at all was kind of weird. I mean, it's still kind of weird that you can't change your proportions, but maybe they'll fix that in New Horizons. The Welcome Amiibo update, or standalone game if you prefer, added the ability to bring villagers that were designed after Zelda and Splatoon characters to enter your village. Plus, you got 2 new mini games, a new area of the map called Harv's Camp, and just overall just a lot of new features that made it almost feel like a brand new game. Definitely one of Nintendo's better update policies because it was all added for free onto the update. Of course, the one thing that'll probably turn people off from actually buying this is the time commitment. You really have to be willing to play this game almost every day or the villagers are going to hate you. But if you can put up with that, it's a nice my home experience. Also the only one I've put on this list. Next up is another oddball game called Jumping Joe and Friends. I'm going to be really surprised if anyone has played this game. So it's a Switch eShop exclusive at the moment. Basically, you control a box that jumps either left or right. And you have to basically keep ascending the platforms that appear really, really quickly. And you have obstacles like spikes and fireballs and enemies. You get power-ups along the way, like a rocket that lets you go higher up. You might get a bomb that destroys all the obstacles. You eventually can unlock other characters besides Joe, because it's called And Friends. And each of those friends has their own power-ups. And while you can't technically beat the game, there is an unlockable system. So while there's not technically an end in sight, it's a high score grabber, very much like an arcade game. You can say, ooh, I want to unlock all of Joe's friends. I want to unlock all the game modes. I want to unlock all the multiplayer modes. Yes, there's 4-player multiplayer in this. It's also really cheap. I got it for about, I think it was like 89 cents, and it's well worth the money. Definitely one of the better eShop games I've reviewed. Alrighty, this one might require a bit of searching. But if you do find it, it's usually pretty cheap. Wii Fit Plus at number 83. I don't really know how to describe what makes Wii Fit Plus so amazing, besides that it's insanely accurate. You step on this balance board, and it can tell you how your center of balance is, how much you weigh, what your BMI is, all that from just stepping on a board. I don't think there's any other exercise peripheral in the market that's this accessible to the vast public. It essentially is a lifetime gym membership as long as you provide the batteries. It stinks that they never found a way to like just let you plug in the balance board somewhere instead of constantly having to re-put in the batteries. There are tons of exercises you can do. There are lots of mini games if you don't want to do just the bland vanilla exercises. There's even a mini game where you can jog in place with the Wii remote in your pocket around Woohoo Island from Wii Sports Resort. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that only Nintendo would do. Plus, you can make your own custom routine, and the game makes you feel great for exercising. Not too many games can do that. Ring Fit Adventure may have surpassed it, but considering that that's kind of a steep price at the moment, and I don't think you can rent it from GameFly, it'll probably be a while before I get around to playing that. Next up, we have Rocket League. Forgot to put the number on there. Number 82. Rocket League's not particularly my favorite kind of genre. It's classified in the, I guess, esports collection of games. Basically, you control a car, and you're on a soccer team or football team if you're from the UK or Australia. And you try to get the ball into the net, but it's a futuristic football/soccer game. So there's like a glass dome, and you can drive up the walls and even on the ceiling. You can do like spin moves, and the ball like explodes after it goes in the net. And overall, it's a really cool concept for a sport game. It's just that that's all you do. So there's not really a story mode. There's not really an adventure where, say, you might have to use the ball to defeat a boss. The Switch version boasts having unlockable cars that are based on Mario, Luigi, and Samus. I never figured out how to get them. To my knowledge, all of its updates are free. You might have to pay for some cosmetic updates, but overall, this is not a microtransaction fueled garbage fest. It's actually a fully functioned game. And it has a lot of customization, so much that it's actually overwhelming. Like, you can customize nearly everything from the handling to the graphics to the amount of mud on the field, you name it. It's a lot of fun. Probably won't satisfy those that aren't fans of the sports games, but it's a pretty harmless investment. The Switch version is called the Collector's Edition. Why? Just call it Rocket League. Also, it allows crossplay with other platforms. So if you've got players that have another version of the game, so like if you're playing with someone who has the Xbox version, you can still play with them. Because Microsoft is actually cool. So stay tuned for a review of Ori and the Blind Forest if I can ever get through it. Next up, number 81, Mario Tennis Aces. Mario Tennis Aces was the first attempt in, well, let's see, the first Mario game, the last Mario Tennis game that had a story mode was Mario Tennis Power Tour for the Game Boy Advance in 2005. So it took until 2018 for them to bring back the adventure mode. But when they did, it felt more fleshed out as a Mario adventure, but less as a tennis adventure. So you essentially have to figure out how to destroy this possessed tennis racket that, I guess, sends Luigi up in a cloud of dust. Recently, they added a new cutscene for the adventure mode, which is cool. So I can't comment on that, but that's neat that they took the feedback. You play as Mario, and you walk around on a world map to get to various tennis challenges, most of which are exclusive to the adventure mode. Like you might have to destroy a bunch of Shy Guys on a train because the train's blocking the way, or you might have to beat boss battles. You might have to solve puzzles, like where should I hit the tennis ball so that it breaks the reflection in the mirror. You could get different tennis rackets. You could level up, which honestly didn't feel like I was achieving much. And it had a a lot of characters that weren't available in the base roster, which I guess could be a down point to some. To others, it's like, yay, more incentive to play the adventure mode. And it had a really cool final battle. In addition to that, if you're not much of a story-heavy person, you're like, I just want to play tennis, you're set there too. They have a lot of new mechanics that don't feel as broken and overpowered as the power shots from Mario Power Tennis, but still feel like an evolution over the practically nothing that Ultra Smash had. You can do what's called a zone shot, where you can like get in the air and in slow motion aim where you want the tennis ball to go, kind of like the slow motion aiming of the bow and arrow in Breath of the Wild. You could also go into slow motion on the court and like rush to the ball if you couldn't get it otherwise. And you can even parry the shot. Albeit, if you tried to parry it too soon, your racket would take damage and eventually break. So it's a fun risk-reward system. Sure, you have the ability to do a power shot, but your opponent has the ability to block it, which pretty much was never the case in Power Tennis. The game doesn't have too much content. The adventure mode is pretty short, and the main mode has hardly anything. Also, it was made on the same engine as Mario Tennis Ultra Smash, so not too much in the graphical department. So, a pretty decent game. Not one I would return to a whole lot, but it could be a fun distraction if my friends brought it over and I was like, okay, yeah, I'll play too. Plus, I hope they eventually put the originally online exclusive characters into the base roster as free DLC, because that'd be cool to play as Pauline in a tennis game. Next up, you knew I'd have to mention a Fire Emblem game in there somewhere. Fire Emblem Warriors. It's technically for both the Switch and the new 3DS. I reviewed the 3DS version. But from what I heard, the two versions are pretty much the same. If you've never played a Warriors game, you're basically like one person trying to slash through thousands of hordes of mindless enemies. Only the mid-bosses and the bosses really even give you remotely a challenge. It's basically like cutting grass. You have a whole bunch of over-the-top samurai-type moves where you're jumping in the air, backflipping, flinging your sword. And it's overall a very addictive type of gameplay. There are moments where you have to like take over an enemy's fort, or you might have to send one of your units that way so that you can go that way. And since the 3DS has two screens, you can easily manage your units' progress on the bottom screen while the action unfolds on the top. They don't have 3D, but that would probably have killed the frame rate. The character selection is one of the weakest parts of the game, with most of the characters, with the exception of 3, only being from Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon, Fire Emblem Awakening, and Fire Emblem Fate. So Ike fans, sorry, you better try Heroes instead. And a lot of the characters in the roster feel like clones of each other, which is weird because the developer said they wanted to try to avoid putting clones in the game. So I don't know what the heck happened there. And it feels like a lot of the updates are mostly for the fan servicey variety. So like the ability for your armor to break, inappropriate physics. Gross. Guys, just make a traditional Fire Emblem game, will ya? It's fun, not as good as Hyrule Warriors. Still a pretty good time. Next up, we have number 79, getting into the 70s. Star Fox. So this game is for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. And I was able to play it on my SNES Classic Edition. And this game is a blast. And I normally don't say that about Super Nintendo games. Normally I'm very like, I prefer more modern games. And I normally don't like shooters either. So the fact that I like this game is a testament to how well it stands. Overall, it's a really graphically impressive game for its time, almost on par with the revolution that was Star Wars in the 70s. You control a pilot by the name of Fox McCloud, and you move him around in 3D space and shoot basically everything in sight. And it's an on-rails 3D shooter on the Super Nintendo. I don't really know what else to say about it, so check my review for more in-depth analysis of it. This is, from what I've been told, it is on Virtual Console. But if not, it's still a worthy investment if you like shooters, or if you don't like shooters and are like me and want something that's a lot more low-key. We have another collection at number 78, which is Namco Museum Arcade Pack. So this is quite the interesting compilation. It features a bunch of classic Namco Bandai games that were originally arcade exclusives, with tons of options to customize. Plus, you have Pac-Man Championship Edition. I think you also have the second Pac-Man Championship Edition, first time being on a Nintendo system. Plus, Pac-Man Versus, which was originally a GameCube exclusive that allowed one player that was holding the GameCube controller to play as Pac-Man, and the other three who were holding Game Boy Advances play as Ghosts. The problem was that Nintendo did not know how to do wireless back then. So you would have to get a Game Boy Advance link cable plus a Game Boy Advance plus the game plus a GameCube controller just to play multiplayer. And just imagine if you wanted to play 4-player mode. That'd be chaos. The Switch version is just get a whole bunch of other Switches. You're fine. So we had a blast playing that game. Pac-Man Championship Edition is like this really flashy, neon-y retake of Pac-Man, which was also a blast, especially when Pac-Man eats a ghost. It gets all cinematic. It's fast-paced, frantic, and fun, unlike the original arcade game, although you can still play the original arcade game if you want, with more options. Overall, it's the ultimate Namco experience. I did. That's going to be very high on this list, so if my voice doesn't go out, you'll have to be waiting a long, long time to get that one, but I love 999. Actually, let me check really quick how high it is as far as DS games. It is my number 1 DS game on this list. Yep. And as far as its positioning, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. It's number 14 on my list altogether, assuming I'm doing the math correctly. The reason why it seems so low is because its sequels were leagues better. So I had to give them credit where it's due. I'm so glad to hear it. Also, I'm actually going to advocate for a non-Nintendo game for a change. If you want to see 999 with full voice acting, you should get the bundle on Steam that's called Zero Escape the Nonary Games, which has an HD remix of 999 plus Virtue's Last Reward, which is basically unchanged from the PSP version. But like I said, if you really loved the ending of 999 and want to hear it with full voice acting, check it out. It doesn't have the same whoa, that's how you use the DS oomph. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, the DS version was the first one that I played, and it was amazing, phenomenal. The problem was that you had to replay the puzzle rooms on every repeat playthrough. And if you didn't know how to get to the true ending, you'd have to play through the game 200 times to figure it out. I eventually did figure out how to get the true ending by trial and error, but you can't get it until you have the almost true ending. So I found out how to get it, and then it said to be continued because you haven't gotten the right ending yet. And I was like, okay, another repeat playthrough. But the ending on the original DS version, well, I guess I can spoil it since you already beat it. And since there's only 2 people watching this, you actually have to play with the DS upside down. And I think you can figure out why that is because of the twist at the end. It just feels a lot more poetic than how they handled it on the PC, which was more or less just the screen swapping out between the 2 perspectives, whereas one perspective would play out on the top screen, the other on the bottom. Yeah, it was pretty neat. It was a pretty substandard DS game when it released, basically just point and click. You've seen that all. And then it gets to the ending and it's like, so that's why you put it on the DS. Cool. But yeah, I'm a massive fan of the Zero Escape series. In fact, I even have a fan fiction of Zero Time Dilemma that you can download for free on Archive of Our Own. It's called Zero Time Dilemma Sigma's Story. So I highly suggest checking that out, assuming you've played the other 2 games, because it'll have massive spoilers. And feel free to interrupt me as I proceed through this, because I like being interrupted. I've even said that in my public speeches. Next up, number 77 is Professor Layton and the Unwound Future. Professor Layton games, I have a very love-hate relationship with them. Normally, they have really grand, almost far-fetched stories, but it's really hard for me to have the time commitment to play them because they revolve around solving puzzles, be it logic puzzles, block moving puzzles, mathematical puzzles. I always hated those. And they felt like they slowed down the game a lot when it would have been better if, say, they had action segments or something like break up the monotony of every 2 seconds. Oh, my boy, we have stumbled upon a puzzle. What made Unwound Future much more tolerable than the other Layton games was that it felt easier. It was still really hard, but it was manageable. You get what's called hint coins for exploring the environment, and you can use those hint coins to purchase advice on how to solve the puzzle. And if you were really stuck, this was the first Layton game that introduced the super hint, which essentially solved the puzzle for you. However, you only have so many hint coins, and since I am not the type that does the save, reset, get the hint, and then boot up the game again so I don't waste a hint, I wanted to be resource effective, and I tried to solve the game as much as possible without running out of hint coins. And if I ran out, oh well. Also, Unwound Future has an amazing story. It starts out pretty stereotypical Layton stuff, like, okay, whatever. We all saw this. And then it just pulls a whopper at the ending that to this day still makes me choke up if I watch it. It was really instrumental in getting me out of depression. It feels like one of the best climaxes I've ever seen in a video game. And honestly, if I wasn't so spoiler phobic, I would just take a YouTube video of that final twist and just plop it here and say, guys, this is awesome. And it even is one of the few DS games that has full orchestration for some of its tracks. So when a DS game actually puts in that much effort to have full cinematics, voice acting, admittedly not full voice acting, but still some is better than nothing, orchestration, an art style that's not anime, and it's made by a Japanese company, published by Nintendo, what are you waiting for? I mean, unless you're really averse against puzzles, I could see that being a turnoff. But if you really, really like tight stories, Unwound Future is the way to go. Especially if you don't like typical Layton stories and want something that's more like, oh, I did not see that coming. Next up's a bit of a controversial one, so I hope someone likes this game. Super Mario Sunshine. I did not see what the hate was for this game for the longest time. When it was first unveiled, I was mostly in that weird state of why do you have to replace the Nintendo 64? But eventually I played the game and I thought it was a blast. It's a lot of fun to control Mario. I liked how that game invented the sliding down the walls and then jump later, as opposed to the jump as soon as you hit the wall, like in Mario 64, or else you'd just bump your nose. The levels where you got rid of the water pack and just did sheer platforming goodness, those were so much fun. They were challenging but fair, except the one in Pianta Village. That one can go burn in the fires that were already in the level. But overall, it felt more like a traditional Mario game. And when you weren't in those levels, you had a water pack that changed up the gameplay significantly, like a lot more spraying stuff and a lot less jumping on enemies. But the hover nozzle allowed you to adjust your jumps in midair in a way that honestly, I don't think any other Mario game has come close to replicating. It feels like the ultimate version of the Tanuki suit. And I would love to see FLUDD appear in Super Mario Maker. Speaking of which, they're releasing an update in 3 days where they're adding new course parts and you can play as Link. And unlike in the Wii U version, Link actually has a move set as opposed to just being a costume. So that's going to be neat. Super Mario Sunshine's music I didn't like, except that a cappella rendition of the main theme. It also is one of the few Mario games that had voice acting in the cinematics. Not very great voice acting, but still a great step up. It actually had a story that wasn't initially kidnap the princess. It was initially Mario and friends go on vacation, and they find that there's someone who looks a lot like Mario, has been defacing the island, and so Mario is accused of being the culprit, and he's asked to clean up the entire island. Yeah, their court system is terrible. They have a courtroom scene to try to like prove Mario's innocence, but the defense does no talking like at all. Peach tries to raise an objection. The judge just says, "Overruled. I sentence Mario." So Mario is a criminal. Who knew? Also, a lot of people complain about the camera in this game. While I can agree that certain parts of the game could have been better executed, in the main game, the camera worked really great for me. The pacing was terrible, but if you could look past that, this was a really fun, beautiful, uh, well-made, themed platformer. But, as evidenced by how low it is on the list, there are definitely better platformers to come. Number 75, Super Mario Party. Now, if I had a best multiplayer games list, this game would be way higher. Yeah, I would agree with you there. Because on one hand, I dislike how Mario Sunshine is based on what episodes you complete as opposed to how many shine sprites you collect. So there's a lot of stuff in the game that's technically optional, but you have to look at a guide to figure out that it's optional in the first place. Plus, the blue coins serve like pretty much no purpose, and the swimming controls are kind of terrible. But from what the strategy guide told me, all you need to do is just beat the first 7 episodes of a course and just only stick to those, never do any optional stuff. You'll get to the ending no problem. Plus, the completion bonus is really stupid. But the water effects are still pretty stunning to this day. I don't know of too many games that have better water. The graphics are pretty neat. The if Mario gets trapped behind a building, the camera will like do a little silhouette of him so you can still keep track of him. That was pretty genius. It felt like a suitable sequel to Mario 64. Sure, it had a couple of missteps along the way, especially its horrendous structure, but it was still an admirable, like, oh, okay, I see why they had to wait from 1996 all the way to 2002 to space this out. Yeah, tell me about it. I remember making a joke when I was on a live stream. I think it was Lightning Farron's live stream. I said that I made a joke that the game had come out recently because the water looked better than Pokemon Sword and Shields did. And I was like, wait, this is a GameCube game? No. Yeah, that game looks leagues better than most Nintendo Switch games Nintendo has published. So getting back to Super Mario Party briefly. The game is kind of dull as a single-player experience, but as a multiplayer experience, it's a blast. River Survival Mode is one of the coolest things that ever happened to Mario. You're all on a raft, and you're riding down a river, and as you pop the balloons, you get cooperative mini games where you actually have to work together, which adds a whole new wrinkle on the Super Mario Party formula. The main board game mode, it's cool that it's back. The board design is really dull. There's only 4 of them. But if you play it in co-op mode in the partner party version, then it becomes a blast. But I'm not going to talk about the game much more because that's one of the few reviews I did where I collabed with both Miss Nekotendo and the Yellow Kazoo because I really wanted to do that game justice. It was one of the most fun reviews I've ever done. If I had to rank, like, of all the reviews I've done, which I've done over 200, if you can't tell by this title, which review was my favorite to do, it was probably Super Mario Party. Especially because Nekotendo improvised with her cat and just made my script even funnier. Next up is another Super Nintendo game, surprisingly. Super Mario World. That's a surprisingly fun platformer of the olden times because Super Mario Brothers, A lot of people regard that as one of the greatest platformers ever made, but have you played that game recently? Its physics are totally different from Super Mario Maker's. Even if you played the Super Mario Brothers style in Super Mario Maker or Super Mario Maker 2, it's actually based on the new Super Mario Brothers U physics because Nintendo thought the old physics were too hard for the new players to get into. And I can totally see that. Super Mario Brothers is nearly impossible to pick up nowadays, but Super Mario World still holds up pretty well. Sure, its physics aren't perfect, but it felt like such an expansive sequel. It had ghost houses, it had an interconnected world map, plus you could find secrets. Yes, it was very slippery. And it had star coins, which are ultimately pointless, but it was still a fun little completionist incentive for those that are trying to maximize their enjoyment. And it added Yoshi, which, granted, Yoshi didn't really do much, but it was still really fun to have a rideable buddy in an era where rideable partners weren't really a thing. Like Ocarina of Time was the first video game to have horseback riding. So they kind of had an aversion to partners back then. I guess they figured like you are one gamer. You're not riding on someone's back when you're playing a game. It's you and the controller. Number 73, New Super Mario Brothers, which is not so new anymore now that it's 13 years old. I always complained, even back then, that New Super Mario Brothers was really easy. It's definitely one of those my first Mario games, especially because they fine-tuned the physics so that it's much more, I guess, akin to Super Mario Sunshine's controls. Like you could wall jump, ground pound. There were a lot of power-ups that just completely broke the game, like the Mega Mushroom. Just pop it into any stage or a boss battle, boom, no challenge whatsoever. Plus, there was a progress meter on the bottom screen. You could store items with the touch of a button. And overall, before the whole new gimmick was overused, this was cool. This was the first time a brand new side scrolling Mario game had been released since Super Mario World on the Super Nintendo. Oh my gosh, I didn't even intend for those games to be side by side in that poetic of a manner. That's so cool. And even if you didn't like the main game, it also had a versus mode where Mario and Luigi would compete to see who could get the most stars in the course, and you could actually like jump on each other's heads, shoot each other with fireballs to steal the stars. And it had a collection of mini games, which, granted, pretty much every DS and Wii game has mini games. That was nothing new. Most of them were stolen from Super Mario 64 DS, but who cares? They're a lot of fun, especially if you have another DS owner. And even if you don't, it can be a cool high score grabber. And it's on the Virtual Console for really cheap. So as long as the Wii U is still out, that's a good deal. The next game on the list isn't so fortunate. New Super Mario Bros. Wii. Nintendo really did not know how to name their games back then, and they still don't. But again, the new moniker was still pretty fresh. So this game was the first side-scrolling Mario game that was brand new since Super Mario World on a console. So New Super Mario Bros. May have been the first brand new side-scrolling Mario game since 1991, but this is the first side-scrolling brand new Mario game on a console since 1991. So quite a long wait. It was also way more challenging than New Super Mario Bros. Nowadays, I could probably breeze through it, but back then, I actually had to think. I actually had to conserve resources. The game looked good for its time, but nowadays it's just like, ugh, boring. The multiplayer mode was a lot of fun, although it did get pretty darn chaotic in four-player mode. Plus, connecting all those Wii remotes was such a pain. We were lucky enough to have two. Also, it had a versus mode, kind of like what New Super Mario Bros. Had, but we didn't really discover it until way too late into the Wii's lifespan. Yeah, I would have to agree with you there. Plus, it had a really obnoxious save system where you could quick save, sure, but then once you resumed the game, the save would be lost. So back then, we had a time limit for how much we could play, and not only that, but if the disc got scratched and it said like you have to reset your Wii to play this, we would lose our save. And the only way to properly save the game was if you got to a castle or a tower. And then to make things even worse, you eventually could unlock the ability to save at any time, but it was after you beat the game. How stupid is that? It feels like such an archaic design choice. I mean, it was even stupider in New Super Mario Brothers because that was a handheld game. But the fact that they kept it in the Wii version is just baffling. All right, we're slowly getting out of the mediocre Mario levels section. New Super Mario Brothers U Deluxe. Honestly, that was a pretty lousy port, but if you're looking at it not as a port and just as a game, it's not as bad as you would think. Granted, New Super Mario Brothers is starting to get really old, but it contains both New Super Mario Bros. U and New Super Luigi U in one package. It also adds Peachette, who is so adorable and a lot of fun to play with, even if it created that stupid meme. And New Super Luigi U actually has pretty decent level design. If you play as Toadette or Nabbit, it actually adds more time to the clock. So in the original game, you had to rush your way through the levels because you only had 100 seconds to beat it. Now you could actually take your time and think. Plus, New Super Luigi U added the floaty lost levels physics. So the levels were specifically designed to take advantage of Luigi's extra jump height, which allowed for a really cool new level design. Sure, they reused the same engine and the same world map, so aesthetically and functionally speaking, it was pretty much identical. But the fact that they could take the existing world map of the original game and put all new levels in it is a really cool achievement. Sure, they got rid of the ability to place blocks with the gamepad, which I always really liked. But taken as a whole, you've got 164 Mario levels. And they got rid of the Miiverse functionality, so no more super inappropriate messages that should not have been in a children's game that I had to close my sister's eyes because it's like, whoa, Nintendo, moderate your stuff, will you? So overall, it was a more suitable for the age group port of Mario U. It's stupid expensive, but I would say that it's probably closer to being justified to being $60 because it has two games for one. Although, devil's advocate, if you have a Wii U, there is a hybrid disc that has both games on it. That's essentially the same as Mario U Deluxe, except you don't get Peachette. So, why not just get that instead? But if you have a Nintendo Switch, I highly recommend checking it out for New Super Luigi U alone because it has such a unique level design philosophy that you don't really see in Mario games so much because it's accounting for Luigi's jumps. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say. This isn't a professional review. This is just an on-the-spot list. So if you want my professional review, I've got a version of that out there. Next up, a little known gem called Super Mario Land 2, 6 Golden Coins, which was the game that Wario debuted in. Hello. It's just a live stream, no worries. I got a big family. I love it. So, Super Mario Land 2 was originally released for the Game Boy, and eventually it had a DX version if you played it with the Super Game Boy accessory on the Super Nintendo. I was not fortunate enough to ever get that accessory, but I did play it on the 3DS Virtual Console. And honestly, this game is such a breath of fresh air for a Mario series that is becoming increasingly stale. And honestly, some of these ideas have never been seen again. You have an entire level that takes place inside a robotic Mario. You can go to outer space. Yes, this game beat Super Mario Galaxy in the outer space theme, even gave Mario a space helmet. You could go in a beehive. Then there's the rabbit suit, which is one of the most broken power-ups in Mario existence. Basically let him fly infinitely across horizontal space. You also got a stupid amount of lives, so getting a game over was pretty much impossible unless you're like me and could not time those jumps. The physics were really good, well designed. The game didn't pause to load the power-up when you got it. It would just seamlessly continue. When you went into a warp pipe, there was no screen transition. The screen would just go down. You wouldn't have to have the screen turn black and load in a new area. So everything was really fast and snappy. It was in black and white, but who cares when the game is this good? And it was non-linear. You had the world map, and you could pretty much go to any world anytime you wanted. The problem is if you got a game over, you would have to basically reset the game from scratch. But again, they give you so many lives, you probably will never have to worry about it. And if you play it on the 3DS Virtual Console, you can save anywhere anyway. Number 69. Super Mario 3D Land. This game was an interesting direction that Nintendo took the Mario series in, because they seem to be struggling with where to take the series after the Galaxy games. So they decided to go back to basics and say, what if we had evolved the Super Mario Brothers formula instead of taking it in the Mario Galaxy, Mario Sunshine directions? And that's essentially what birthed that genre of linear 3D level design in the Mario games. So it was essentially if Super Mario Brothers was designed with 3D in the first place. Granted, Super Mario World is like this as well, but this was specifically tailored to the 3DS. So the levels felt more designed for a handheld experience. The circle pad controls Mario like a dream. It's by far the best use of stereoscopic 3D the 3DS has ever seen, and this was one of the earliest games for the system. And the fact that it still hasn't even been touched is just baffling to me. Like, there were entire segments of the game where Nintendo would make fun of you if you weren't playing in the 3D. In fact, I think they were actually selling a 2DS bundle that had Super Mario 3D Land in that. What a burn. If there was any game that was not designed with the 2DS in mind, it was 3D Land. And that's what made it so great. That's why I hated Super Mario 3D World so much, because the Wii U is this super powerful first console Nintendo makes in HD, yet all it can do is a sequel to a 3DS game that was designed for a handheld. No thanks. Mario 3D Land is for the most part pretty easy, but it has a humongous post-game, about as long as the main game itself. And that's when the difficulty really ramps up. So if you're just like, ugh, Paul, I'm breezing through the first 8 worlds, you won't be breezing for long. Just wait until you get to World 9 and above. Next up is another game that slipped past the Virtual Console treatment, but was recently ported to the Switch. No, it wasn't ported to the Switch. I'm thinking of something else. Super Scribblenauts for the DS. This was a pretty surprising re-release, because in 2013, after the DS was officially discontinued, they made a collection pack which had the first Scribblenauts and the second one on one DS card. That's insane! These games have some of the most content I have ever seen in a DS game outside of Animal Crossing. Basically, you control this character named Maxwell, who has a notebook that can literally summon anything you want. Do you want a T-Rex? Sure. Do you want a space alien? Sure. So there were like tens of thousands of words you could come up with. And the title screen alone was basically just this playground where the game just said, go ahead, create whatever you want. And Super Scribblenauts came out and said, let's expand the formula by letting you put adjectives. So you could have a spicy lawyer, or a chocolate dinosaur, or a friendly carnivore. And you could stack adjectives too. So you could have a friendly, gigantic, cheesy, romantic turtle, whatever. And so it essentially created endless possibilities. Plus, the level design was a lot more focused, so that it was more geared toward a puzzle platformer genre as opposed to an action adventure. So you'd have to solve little miniature dilemmas like, how am I going to sneak into a wedding party? How am I going to get this kid's present out of the Christmas tree because it got lodged in the branches? I usually found in the levels that did have combat, just put invincible as an adjective and you can cheese through anything. The game encourages you to go out of your way to break the rules, and it actually rewards you if you can find another solution to the puzzle than what they encouraged. Like, they'll say, like, ooh, you found another way to get through the game. They also removed the turn limit or object limit that was in the first Scribblenauts. So In that game, they would penalize you if you used too many objects. Now they're just like, go to town. Just use a whole bunch of items if you want. And they refined the controls so that you can play with traditional buttons if you want. You can still use the stylus if you really want to, but you can play the game fully normally too. So overall, one of the better sequels I've seen. Its graphics are pretty primitive, but apart from that, it's so insanely creative. I wish more games would take advantage of this. Oh boy, time to open up the fire gates. The Legend of Zelda: Skyward Sword. Oh my goodness. This game was so divisive in my family because when the Wii came out, you had to be connected to the TV. And when I played that game, I pretty much had the hatred of my brothers forcing me to create my own opinions, even if I necessarily didn't agree with them. My brother would constantly bash the music, and I'd be like, the music's actually really good. No, it's not. The music is terrible. And I guess it sort of conditioned my brain to like keep agreeing with everything he said because he was like helping me through the game. Then eventually I tried playing Skyward Sword on my own, and I found that it was a lot more enjoyable because the Wii Motion Plus, it's a very hit or miss device. I've usually found that it helps if you specify on your Wii system where the sensor bar is being placed in relativity to your TV. Most people don't think about going to the options menu first. They just jump into the game because they're like, yes, a new Zelda game. The Wii has options, people use them. Skyward Sword wasn't my favorite art direction for the Zelda series, but it did make for some pretty neat looking environments. Also Skyloft, a hub world in a Zelda game. Who'd have thought of that before? The combat was really fun. A lot of the enemy designs were pretty cool. Although, truth be told, I felt like I liked the parts of the game that didn't have the Motion Plus better. Like there were times where Link would go into what was called the Silent Realm, which was essentially like the Twilight Realm of that game, where he'd have to collect these jewels to like bring the light back. But he would have to watch out for these creatures called Guardians, which were actually even scarier than the Guardians in Breath of the Wild because they could kill you in one hit. So it's essentially like a Metal Gear game, except stealth doesn't work because they can see you wherever you go. So it was more so of try to avoid getting into the light of the lanterns. So I loved those parts of the game. I loved it when they took away your items and you have to try to get all of them back. Be right back. I need a drink. Oof. Oh. Alrighty. Doesn't appear like I missed much, so that's nice. Alrighty. So I was at Skyward Sword. Oh, it was also the first Zelda game to have an original soundtrack that was fully orchestrated. I say original soundtrack because Twilight Princess had an orchestra piece at the very beginning, but then they ditched it for the rest of the game. And then Ocarina of Time 3D had a fully orchestrated additional credits scene. This game, they just said, we're going to use an orchestra for quite a few of the pieces. And while I don't think there were enough orchestrations, the ones that did exist were epic. And I wish more of them would have been in Skyward Sword, but at least they put in Ballad of the Goddess. So I'm cool with that. Next up. Oh boy, I'm going to really get into controversial territory in a moment. 66. If you can pronounce this game, good for you, because I still can't figure it out. Spellcheck says I've even done an error because it's so weird. Fiat Rhythm Final Fantasy Curtain Call. So, for those of you that don't know what the heck this title is supposed to mean, this was a sequel to a rhythm game on the 3DS called Fiat Rhythm Final Fantasy. Basically, it took tons and tons and tons of iconic tunes from across Final Fantasy history and turned it into a rhythm game where you'd have to swipe, tap, or hold the stylus based on the arrows that appeared on the targets. And there were 3 different varieties. There was the field variety, the battle, and the events. And that would change how the targets would appear. So essentially, you felt like you were playing a Final Fantasy game, but you were primarily focused on the music. There were RPG elements added in there, like you could customize your characters, you could get power ups to make the music easier. And then Curtain Call came along, and it included all of the songs, including all of the DLC from the original game, right out of the gate. Plus, it had even more DLC. Granted, the purchasing options were kind of weird. Like, you can only buy the songs one at a time. I wish there were, like, deals where you could get them in packages. And they also don't let you listen to the songs before you purchase them. So, back when I was still dating, I had my girlfriend play the songs on her phone so that I could say, oh, I wouldn't mind playing that song. And it had the World Ends With You DLC, so I got to slash and bash to calling, which was awesome. And it also added the ability to play the game with traditional button controls. So if you didn't like the stylus-heavy nature of the first Fiat Rhythm, you could just put the stylus back in the system. It also had a music player, so you could listen to the songs whenever you wanted. And a lot of these songs and even the games themselves still haven't found their way on a Nintendo console. So if you really want to hear the orchestral version of One Winged Angel, this is pretty much the only place to do it at the moment. Okay, Star Fox 2 at number 65. So this, at the current moment, the only way to play it officially is on the SNES Classic Edition. I mean, there are ROM hacks out there, but I don't endorse that kind of stuff. Unless it helps make another cool Nintendo game like Sonic Mania, then maybe I'll make an exception. Star Fox 2, despite having the number 2 in the title, feels very different from the original Star Fox. Essentially, it's more so of a Majora's Mask kind of departure. So you have a world map where you can see all the planets at once, and you have a timer that shows how much Corneria can sustain damage before it gets destroyed by Andross's forces, and then you have to start over. So you can like move around the map in a top-down formation and intercept incoming missiles or ships, and then you'd get into a full range 3D mode where you'd have to attack them. But you also had levels. Hello, Mom. Just doing a live stream, so no worries.
Okay. If you're still hungry, you just...
Okay, thanks. Hope you guys don't mind that I'm eating my dinner while I'm live streaming. But there were also levels that were ground-based. So your R-Wing could like sprout legs, and then you could start walking around, and you could move the camera, you could shoot stuff. This is a 3D game that was originally a Super Nintendo game. It was just canceled because the Nintendo 64 was on the way. And it doesn't try to do anything modern, like saying, now that it is on the SNES Classic Edition, now you have more features. The only features you have are the features that every other SNES game on the collection includes, such as rewinding 4 save files and HD. So, this is by far the easiest Super Nintendo game I've ever played. I think I was actually able to beat it twice in one day, which I don't think I've been able to say that for any other video game for that matter. So, I would highly recommend getting a Super Nintendo Classic Edition because that game alone provided a lot of proof of concepts that eventually made their way into Star Fox Zero, and a few that made their way into Star Fox 64, like Wolf. Smash Brothers tried to lie to you and say that his first appearance was Star Fox 64, but he actually was in Star Fox 2 first. So, there's some obscure Nintendo trivia for you. Okay, Pretty sure no one's going to agree with me on this one. But again, my list, so my numbers. Final Fantasy 15 Pocket Edition HD. This was the game that people actively tried to convince me not to buy for some reason. My coworker Kevin was like, "No, Paul, you can't. This is a watered down version of the PS4." No, Kevin, I'm still buying this. But Paul, it's not going to have the open world. I don't care, Kevin. I'm buying this. I didn't listen to him, obviously. I went ahead. I bought it. Game looks atrocious. But it's a really impressive deal for a game that was originally on mobile. That the biggest thing they added to the Switch version is that you can move Noctis around freely in battles. In the mobile version, he moved automatically, and you would just decide what moves he would use. So, this is not an open world game like the PS4 version. It's more of a Super Mario Galaxy style linear run through the major points of the story. So essentially, it cut out a lot of the unnecessary stuff from the main PS4 version while giving you enough information to complete the main story. It features the original voice acting team plus the original music. So you're getting like some of the best orchestrations you've ever heard on a Nintendo system. And like I said, the graphics are atrocious. The characters don't even move their faces. Like, even Nintendo 64 games did that. Why can't the Switch version do that? The battle systems are a lot of fun. They're insanely easy. Like, you'll probably never get a game over. But they're, real time, and Noctis has this ability to, like, fast travel mid-battle. So that can lead to some interesting strategic approaches, like fast traveling to the top of a tower so you can take out a sniper, then like quickly zooming down to the floor. The boss battles are really huge and imaginative. And from what I saw from the PS4 version, it simplified a lot of the more complex mechanics from that game. So yes, it's watered down. When you're driving in the car sections aren't as long and you can't play classic Final Fantasy tunes. But it still has an amazing soundtrack. It still has incredible boss battles. It has a lot of game-breaking bugs and glitches, so I don't know if I'd recommend it unless they've patched those out in subsequent months since I bought it. But I don't regret my purchase. I probably won't play it again. But it did inspire me to buy the soundtrack. Yoko Shimomura sure knows what she's doing. Okay, on to a much more agreeable subject matter. Number 63, Sonic Generations. Now, I actually have played the 360 version of Sonic Generations. And while I think it's a lot of fun and very visually appealing, it's also bogged down by a lot of frustration. Like, it has side missions where you might have to go hunting for something, where the game becomes dreadfully slow, or it has like overworld puzzles, multiple characters, the stuff that Sonic games have been trying to escape from for years. Plus, the 3D levels were hit or miss. But the 3DS version decided to combine the Genesis era with the DS era to great results. So, the gimmick of Sonic Generations was that you could play as two Sonic the Hedgehogs at the same time because of, dimensional time travel nonsense. So when you played as classy, pudgy Sonic, it would have the retro sound effects. This is before Sonic Mania came along, too. And you had the spin dash, so he could go faster. And the levels are more, I guess, precise, slower paced. I mean, they were still pretty fast, but they weren't like blisteringly fast that the screen would blur. All of the levels are based on games from throughout Sonic's history. So you had games from the Genesis era, games from the game. There's even a level from Sonic Colors that takes advantage of the wisps. And then modern Sonic played more like the Sonic Rush titles and the DS version of Sonic Colors, where it would be a mostly side-scrolling view, but every now and then there'd be multiple camera angles, loop-de-loops. You could do tricks. Sonic would have little voiceover blips. And I managed to get an S rank on Green Hill Zone and the Sonic Colors place. The music was also really well done too. There was both a classic and a modern rendition of every track. So the Genesis tunes would have a more blistering guitar-heavy version of each of them, and the more modern tracks would have Genesis style in the soundtrack. So you essentially had something for everyone. It also had an in-game soundtrack player that let you play tons of classic Sonic tunes and even choose to have those songs play in the level even if they didn't fit the theme. Like you could have music from Sonic 4 playing in the Green Hill Zone. And it also condensed the narrative, kind of like Final Fantasy 15 did, so that you only had basically Sonic, Tails, and Robotnik. I mean, who else do you need? Next up, a game that does not get the recognition it deserves. WarioWare Gold. This is the first WarioWare game I ever owned. And I actually ended up buying it after renting it from Gamefly because I was so satisfied with it that I wanted to be able to keep it. Basically, it's essentially both Wario's greatest hits in his microgame collection and a bunch of new microgames at the same time. What made this version particularly engaging is the little extra touches they made to make it appeal to multiple people. So for starters, it has a story mode, and the story mode is fully voiced. So if you ever wondered how does Wario talk in like full sentences, well, here's your way to find out. How does Ashley sound in full sentences? Go check out the story mode. It's not a particularly gripping narrative. It kind of goes all over the place. But I didn't go into the story mode expecting a tight, deep, plot-heavy experience. I went into it expecting total wackiness, and I got what I expected. Not only that, but there's a lot of Nintendo love sprinkled into both the microgames and the optional collectibles. It has one of the coolest uses of amiibos to date. Like you could scan why am I holding a coat hanger? You could scan a compatible amiibo, and then an artist would paint a picture of what they think that amiibo is. That's really cool. I kind of wish I could re-rent that game again just to try out that amiibo functionality. Plus, you could get trophies, like in Melee. Like you could get a full model of, say, the GameCube, the Virtual Boy. You had little toys you could play with. Some of the microgames were even Nintendo themed. Like there's a microgame where you have to get Link to sail to the right island in the Wind Waker, or get Mario to spray the right amount of sludge off of a building in Mario Sunshine. And it used the 3DS in pretty much every way you could think of. There were microphone-based games, there were touch games, there were tilt games. Pretty much everything you could want. There was even a game that simulated pointing the Wii Remote at the right channel on the Wii menu by using the 3DS's gyro sensor. How genius is that? Now, microgames are only a couple of seconds long, but when you have so many of them, and this is like the most microgames the series has ever seen, this is essentially the WarioWare Ultimate, if Smash Ultimate were to ever have a successor. Next up is Wii Sports Resort. Or the Wii. Duh. This was the first game to utilize Wii Motion Plus, and was the game that they used to show off what Motion Plus was capable of, even though not too many Wii games ended up using it. They created a whole new setting called Woohoo Island, which has actually been used in quite a few other Nintendo games. And it was this gorgeous paradise of an island that, honestly, if I was the type that was okay with summer vacations, I wouldn't mind taking a vacation to Woohoo Island. It has a bowling alley, it has a fountain, it has a jogging track, an archery course. There's tons of stuff to do. My favorite minigame is the sword fighting minigame, where you have to strike the perfect medium between attacking and defense by, like, holding the B button to get in a defensive stance and letting go of it to attack. And I eventually got to pro level because I was just so determined to master my sword fighting skills. But you can also do stuff like free roaming, where you can get on an airplane and fly around the island and see where all the other events took place. And that was probably one of the best parts of the whole experience, was the connectedness. With the possible exception of the bowling alley, every event let you see parts of the island in the background. Like when you were sword fighting, for example, you'd be able to see the beach in the distance. Or, for instance, when you were doing archery, you'd like be shooting at things on the jogging path. When you're on the jogging path, you might be able to see the sword fighting arena in the background. So it feels like that's one of the best ways to do a mini game collection I've ever seen. Not only that, but you have an individual save file per mini game per Mii you've got saved. So say you've got 5 Miis, you'd have 5 save files for a game. If you maxed out the counter of Miis on your Wii system, you could practically have unlimited save files. So overall, it makes for I guess I would say it would make for a great party game, but it requires Wii Motion Plus, so unless you have a whole bunch of Wii remotes that come with Motion Plus in them, you're going to have to shell out extra cash. But if you can get multiplayers, this game is a blast. I highly recommend picking it up, especially because it's not on the Virtual Console, so if you can track this down, good for you. Okay, we're getting into a bit of the unknown, so if anyone has played this game, please let me know, because I really think this game deserves more attention. Little Inferno for the Wii U, which is now also on the Switch. This is a game where you control fire, really. You have a fireplace, and you get various toys that you can dump into the fireplace, and then you use the stylus to drag fire onto the objects. And the fire physics are really well done, probably the best I've ever seen in a game, besides maybe Breath of the Wild. But depending on how the objects interact with each other, that can create like almost unlimited combinations of fun stuff. Like, for example, say you have popcorn, and then you have a bomb. Well, the bomb would go off, which would cause the popcorn to pop more than it normally would. Or you'd have, say, a flamethrower that's spewing out green flames. Then it would cause anything that goes into the flames to become pixelated like a retro NES game. So trying to figure out those combinations is not only fun, but the game actually requires you to do that to progress in the story. Because yes, it actually has a story. Admittedly not a very good one, but it serves its purpose, and for that I applaud them. Basically, the game will give you vague hints about a possible combination, and you'll have to figure out which 2 or 3 and eventually 4 and up items do you have to burn at the same time to progress in the game. Now, it does have a bit of a mobile game kind of feel with like how long it takes for the objects to ship to your house, and you can use tickets to speed up the process, which was not very fun at all, required a lot of patience. But once you actually were burning stuff, the fun was great. And if you decide to buy it on the Switch, it does force you to use motion controls if you're playing on the TV, but at least it has an in-game soundtrack. And I always love games like that. Okay, we are now in the 50s. So if those of you who have been, say, falling asleep in the stream so far have been, start waking up, because we're getting into the elites now. Tetris 99. It actually probably was the 99th Tetris game. I'd have to look that up if such information even exists. The reason this was called Tetris 99, I've got the coat hanger off the camera. Oh, there it goes. I always have a fascination with coat hangers. I don't know why. This is a plastic one, so if you're concerned like, Paul, don't cut yourself, don't worry. This thing can't cause any damage. Tetris 99 was a battle royale puzzle game, something that no one saw coming. If they did, they're geniuses, because I certainly didn't see it coming. Nintendo published this, and originally it was a Nintendo Switch Online exclusive deal. Nowadays, they have options so that anyone can pick it up. You can get the physical version, which contains all of the DLC and has single player modes. Plus, if you do buy the DLC, then for $10, you can get missions. You can get modes where you play against bots. But if you did play it online, you were facing against 98 other Tetris players. And you'd have to see who is the ultimate Tetris champ, or the Tetris Maximus, as they would call it. And this was so much fun. It was almost worth the price of admission for Nintendo Switch Online for that alone. To say, oh my gosh, out of 99 people, I am the 11th best Tetris player. And especially when I would look in the stats and see like that I was, say, a level 2 and I beat someone who was level 45, it was honestly kind of cool. Now, this game is pretty bare bones if you're playing it by yourself, because the missions can get old after a while, and bots only have so much strategy before you just kind of know what they're thinking. But the game itself is free. And if you have a Nintendo Switch Online membership, then you don't have to pay anything. You're getting a free Tetris game with Battle Royale. Granted, there are other Tetris games that have other features that Tetris 99 doesn't, such as a tutorial and a story mode, like in Puyo Puyo Tetris. But if you want pure Tetris at its finest and with fan service, because the latest update allowed you to have custom themes, so like Zelda-based, there's one based on 3 houses for a while. Hopefully they make that publicly available. And so besides Tetris DS, this is probably the best Tetris game you're going to find. And again, it's free if you have Switch Online. If you don't, it's about $20. That's a steal. Number 58, Punch-Out! Specifically the Wii version. Because I tried playing the NES version and it didn't seem to register my commands fast enough. This game comes across as a boxing game at first, but it's actually more of a puzzle, because you have to figure out what is the best timing to land a punch on my opponent, and when are they exhibiting weakness so that I can take advantage of them. So you play as Little Mac, who's only 5'7", which may seem whoppingly huge to a girl, but for a guy, that's a pretty wimpy height. And all of his opponents are like 5'10" and up, so they usually tower over him, and you feel like, how am I going to beat all these Goliaths? And so the thrill of being the underdog and taking the gold for like the best boxer in the league is a lot of fun. The graphics are amazing. Like, I was honestly shocked to find that this originally came out on the Wii. The characters are very detailed and extremely expressive, and put Pokemon Sword and Shield to shame. And the controls are also really responsive, especially if you play with the Wii Remote held sideways, retro style. And the Wii version actually makes it easier to dodge the opponent's punches by making your opponent flash red. However, that doesn't mean the game itself is easy. Far from it. I still died quite a few times, even with the indicator. It just made it ever so slightly easier to choreograph your opponent's moves. Now, there is a multiplayer mode, but it's honestly really garbage. Like, the frame rate drops to like 10 frames. And honestly, it felt like it was just put in there for the sake of, hey, we got to make this title some kind of remake. I mean, we're calling it Punch-Out, not Punch-Out 2. It also has balance board support. I didn't try that out because I didn't have a balance board at the time, but I imagine that's another gimmick. This game actually is on the Virtual Console for about $20, and that is a terrific price. All right, onto the game that I really hope gets some Nintendo recognition, Banjo-Tooie at number 57. Hooyah! You know I'm a huge Banjo fan, so I had to put this game somewhere on the list. Banjo-Tooie came out only 2 short years after Banjo-Kazooie and managed to improve on it in almost every way. Now, in retrospect, I've been able to look at Tooie and say, it's not as enjoyable overall of an experience as Banjo-Kazooie. I've never 100%ed Tooie, but I've 100%ed Banjo-Kazooie like at least 2 or 3 times. Tooie also has frequent frame rate drops that can get pretty abysmal. I mean, Nintendo 64 games are not supposed to have frame rate issues, but yet Banjo-Tooie somehow does, and it doesn't even use the expansion pack, which is even more bizarre because Donkey Kong 64 did. Nevertheless, it makes the banjo concept bigger and better. The worlds are huge. They make an effort to like have the worlds be connected to each other. Like you could travel from one world to the next. You could ride a train through the worlds. You had all of the moves from the original game. Some were even upgraded. Plus, you got tons and tons of new moves. Plus, you could make Banjo and Kazooie split up so that each of them had their own moves. There was a multiplayer mode. There was a first-person shooter section. This game had a lot of variety and a lot of really cool ideas. Now, granted, in retrospect, I think it would have been neat if Rare had somehow been able to make a map. Because that's something I've been noticing in Grunty's Revenge, is that game really could have used a map. But it's still a very fun platformer. The Xbox 360 and Xbox One versions have definitely patched over a lot of the issues, especially the frame rate. Like, you can actually play the game normally. But overall, if you really want to appreciate Banjo's inclusion in Smash Brothers, I would highly recommend playing the Nintendo 64 version so you could see exactly how much Rare pretty much dominated the console market in the 90s and early 2000s. And maybe Microsoft will consider selling Banjo back to Nintendo? Who knows? At least, even with the choppy frame rate, gigantic level designs and all, you're still going to have a better time than Nuts and Bolts. Before you point fingers at me, I watched the Completionists episodes of it. It doesn't look good. Next up, we have Super Mario Maker. Now, Super Mario Maker, you'd be surprised how many people don't know this that I've talked to. There's actually 3 versions of Super Mario Maker. There's the one on the Wii U, then there's a 3DS port, and then there's the brand new Switch version called Super Mario Maker 2. So this is specifically talking about Super Mario Maker 1. Now, in the 3DS version's defense, it does have a single-player mode that's way more expansive, but Mario Maker has a lot more unique, whimsical touches that overall make it a more enjoyable experience. For starters, the Wii U's online is free, so you've got like tons of thousands of millions of Mario levels that users have created that you can play for free. And they load generally pretty quickly. You can also go into a 100 Mario challenge and see if you can take on a gauntlet of user-made levels. Some of them are garbage, but you get a couple of levels that are pretty neat every now and then. Also, you can make your own Mario levels. And from what I've heard, it's way more natural than doing it with the Switch because this game was designed with the Wii U gamepad in mind. So you could be making your levels on the gamepad and then see the results on the screen. And overall, I wish like the Switch version like incorporated some version of the gamepad into Mario Maker 2, kind of like how Smash for Wii U incorporated GameCube controllers. Because everyone liked GameCube controllers, so Sakura is just like, oh, Nintendo, please. You're making us create an entire accessory for something that was built into the Wii in the first place. Also, Mario Maker is compatible with nearly every amiibo in existence. So, just to name a few examples, say you wanted to play through a Mario level as Ganondorf. Sure, why not? It'll even have creepy music from A Link to the Past after you beat it. Do you want to play through a Mario level as Robin from Fire Emblem Awakening? They even have Fire Emblem support in a Mario game. How many games, period, have Fire Emblem support? Like, I know when people complain that there's too many Fire Emblem reps in Smash Brothers, but honestly, I feel like besides Smash Brothers, Fire Emblem doesn't have enough representation. Also, Super Mario Maker has an idea book that comes with the original game. Well, I guess had would be a more accurate assumption, because who honestly sells the full package deal anymore? Plus, it has a fly swatting minigame, and you could play levels from the Nintendo World Championships. So overall, this was a pretty ambitious Wii U game, and maybe if it had come out sooner in the Wii U's life, this could have really saved the system. I feel like this is one of the probably the biggest system seller on the Wii U. Not saying it's the best Wii U game, but it's probably the ultimate reason to buy a Wii U for its own sake. Like, it was made with the Wii U in mind. The best use of the gamepad by far, supports nearly every amiibo. And overall feels like this is what Nintendo wanted from the start, just didn't get there at first. So it didn't get the recognition it deserved. Thankfully, things improved a bit with Super Mario Maker 2. Now, one thing I don't like about Mario Maker 2 is that a lot of its best features are locked behind if you're a creator and if you pay for Nintendo Switch Online. But fans of playing Mario Maker as opposed to just making can have a full story mode that actually has multiple characters that aren't Toads and a plot twist. And they added a whole new style called Super Mario 3D World. They're planning on adding new styles in the future. And by future, I mean probably way future, because they just announced an update that doesn't have a new style. So, what? The 3D World style is basically everything that I hated about Super Mario 3D World gone, and just replacing it with a more traditional side-scrolling experience, which I love. It looks beautiful. They have a ton of classic Mario tunes, including the Gusty Garden Galaxy, that you can play in any theme. Plus, there's more themes, more new retro music by Koji Kondo himself. And overall, I feel like the level design is really stellar. If you play in the story mode, you're basically guaranteed to get top-notch Nintendo-created levels. The user levels are hit or miss from what I've seen in live streams. And overall, I'm just like, you struggle with that. I'm just going to keep not paying for Switch Online. But you get over 100 of some of the best Mario levels in history. And who knows, maybe Nintendo will make a version 2.0 of the story, and then people like me who are more stingy with their money will have something else to like. There's no amiibo support, which is dumb. But other than that, this is a pretty top-notch sequel. Okay, that was a pretty terrible transition, but at least this isn't. Number 54, Deltarune. I'm pretty sure I don't have to bother saying Chapter 1 because that's the only version of Deltarune that's currently out. So, let me reiterate for a minute, just in case you guys don't get how big of a deal this is. Deltarune is free. Yeah, that's right. You can get the first chapter of the game entirely free. And even though you might be thinking, only the first chapter, Paul? That sounds like a demo to me. But the thing is, it feels like a full game. Like, it feels like it has a proper ending. It feels like it has a proper curtain call. It feels like it's got the perfect character arcs and redemption. And overall, besides maybe a handful of points that could be elaborated on, you could theoretically stop with this game and be totally satisfied. And then you don't have to pay any more money. And if you don't like it, it's free. You didn't spend anything. So Deltarune is a pseudo-sequel to Undertale, as in it takes place in its own, like, alternate reality of, like, what Undertale could have been. So it's neither a sequel nor a prequel. It's sort of like its own reimagining of Undertale. It was created by the same guy, and it has a lot of the same assets and engines, but with a few improvements to make it overall a smoother playing experience. You have a run button, which was one of my biggest gripes about the original Undertale. In battles, you have 3 characters as opposed to just 1, so that adds a little bit of a more wrinkle of strategy. Plus, when you're dodging enemy attacks, if you get close enough to the attack but don't actually get hit, you build up tension points, which allow you to unleash special moves. Also, like Undertale, you can choose to play either pacifist or neutral. Unfortunately, it's not possible to do a genocide route. But unlike Undertale, where it drastically affects the endgame, Deltarune goes out of its way to tell you that your decisions do not matter. Within like the first 10 minutes of the game, it tells you that. And just continues to reinforce the point. Like in subsequent playthroughs, you might say, maybe it would be better if I did this decision. It's not going to make any major impact on your game at all. While the true ending is the one where you try not to kill anyone, you can still go out of your way to if you want. It's just that the ending is not going to change. Now, that could have deeper poetry for the rest of the game. So, make it that we will. Now, personally, I think Deltarune's not quite as good as Undertale, as evidenced by the fact that Undertale's not on this list yet. It's going to be, spoiler alert. But Deltarune is still a magnificent game because it really expands upon the humor and character development that Undertale only sort of had. Because you have a party of 3 instead of a party of 1, you're pretty much always going to be encountering dialogue, like every couple of seconds. And sometimes the dialogue will even reflect how the battles play out. And not only that, but Susie's character has some top-notch character development. Like, wow, practically Dimitri levels of character development if you played Fire Emblem Three Houses. So, all this is in a game that is free and has some pretty awesome music. Now, you could say the game is pretty easy if you've already played Undertale, but thankfully it has a hidden boss that'll really put those skills to the test. I love that hidden boss so much, I've actually filmed footage for him 3 different times. Because I'm just really excited to show people, like, you think Deltarune's a cakewalk? Try facing Jevil. So, if I haven't said this enough, it's free. Download it now, please. And if you don't have a Switch, get it on PC. I might end up stopping at the number 50 just because I don't want to completely kill my voice doing all this. But we'll see. Number 53, Fire Emblem Awakening. Oh man, Awakening. That was such a hype train for me when it first came out. I know for a lot of people, Awakening was where they got their start in Fire Emblem, but for me it was more like, well, an awakening of Fire Emblem. Like, it felt like Fire Emblem was kind of just there in the background. Like, sure, a couple of people liked their games, but like, normally if I said, hey, did you play the latest Fire Emblem? The latest? What? You mean that guy in Super Smash Bros.? Okay, that's from a Fire Emblem game, but what about Path of Radiance? What's Path of Radiance? Like, it was kind of just that thing that no one knew what it was, and only diehard Nintendo fans even gave the games a look. So when Awakening came out, they actually pushed the marketing for it. They had DLC. They poured everything into this game, and it ended up saving the franchise from being completely canned by Nintendo. Now, how did it fare as a Fire Emblem game for a Fire Emblem fanatic like myself? Honestly, it was kind of bare bones. It didn't really do anything to really revolutionize the series, but it didn't do anything to break the series either. It kind of was mostly a play it safe Fire Emblem. Sure, it had the partner up system, which was really broken. And it also had a lot more character voices and personality. But ultimately, it was just like okay, here's another Fire Emblem game. Cool. Now, newbies are going to love it. Newbies are going to say, this is one of the coolest games ever and totally worth buying a 3DS for. I would say, well, Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn are like so much better and have like 10 times better of a story, but those games are also stupid rare and even more expensive. However, Awakening is a good start because not only does it have multiple difficulty settings, but it's the first Fire Emblem game in North America to include a casual mode. So in previous Fire Emblems, if your unit died, they're gone forever. But in Awakening, the unit will return after a level. So if you're super determined to get all of the support conversations and develop all of their backstories, the casual mode can be a great entryway for players that are unfamiliar. And if there are fans like me who like that whole nerve-wrackingness of potentially you losing one of your best friends, you can just keep the classic mode on. So it essentially has something for pretty much everyone. And it has pretty stellar music, too. With an in-game soundtrack player. Whoopee! Number 52, Mario and Luigi, Bowser's Inside Story. This was a game that I really should have gotten into much earlier. I was really turned off by how wacky it seemed. I'm not generally the type of guy that likes experimenting a whole lot. I generally prefer staying with something that plays it safe. I didn't really like Superstar Saga that much. I skipped out on Partners in Time entirely. So when Bowser's Inside Story was announced, I was just like, oh dear, this is going to be a disaster. But then, well, I became a reviewer, and then the 3DS version was announced. I realized that this was probably going to be the last 3DS game Nintendo ever released. So I said, well, since no one else seems to like the 3DS anymore, I'm going to give it a shot. And I loved it. I did not like the Bowser Jr.'s journey segment of the game. I didn't even finish that. So in my review, I didn't even bother including it in the title because I was like, whatever. But the Bowser's Inside Story segment was really well done. Basically, you keep switching control between the Mario Brothers and Bowser because the Mario Brothers spend most of the game trapped inside Bowser's insides. And Bowser spends most of the game in a top-down perspective exploring the Mushroom Kingdom and trying to take back his castle from Fawful, who is the main antagonist of Superstar Saga. And the relationship between Mario and Bowser is really spectacular, making for some of the coolest puzzles I've ever seen in a Mario game. For example, if Bowser's thirsty and he gets a drink, then it'll flood the inside of his stomach, opening up new areas for Mario and Luigi to explore. Then, say if Mario and Luigi hammer one of Bowser's nerves, that'll give Bowser an energy rush so that he can pull on something that's otherwise too heavy for him. So this constant unknown teamwork aspect ends up paying off in really surprisingly unique ways. The game also has a pretty cool combat system that, if you're good enough, allows you to avoid taking any damage at all because you can jump over most of the attacks. Also, playing as Bowser just is so cool. Why don't we have more Mario games where Bowser's the main character? The writing for him is so hilarious that it's practically worth the price of admission alone. And if you find that the game is too hard, there are easy modes to make the battles go by a little bit easier. There's amiibo support so that you can get extra items so that you don't have to grind as much. And the 3DS version includes better visuals plus slightly better audio. It does kind of chug a little bit in the frame rate department compared to the DS version, which is odd. It's a 3DS game. Shouldn't it be more powerful? But it also gets rid of anything in the original version that had microphone controls. Since I'm now getting older, I can't blow into the microphone like I used to. So that's a welcome improvement for us fogies. So Bowser's Inside Story is a worthy RPG to pick up, whether you have a DS or a 3DS. Would I recommend the DS version over the 3DS version? I'm not really sure. I haven't played enough of it, but from what I've seen, it is ever so slightly faster. So if you prefer speed over substance, yeah, that's the version I have. Plus, it has new story content, so that can't hurt. Oh boy. Number 51. Whoops. I'm having trouble typing this. Cadence of Hyrule. I am not going to type out its full name, which is Cadence of Hyrule Crypt of the Necrodancer featuring The Legend of Zelda. Ugh. How did they ever think that was marketable? Basically, it takes the basic gameplay of a Switch eShop game known as Crypt of the Necrodancer, which was basically a rhythm-based roguelike, and they just put Zelda characters into it, which makes for a very unique take on the Zelda universe. Essentially, you can choose between Link, Zelda, and Cadence, and eventually you can, switch between all three of them when you want. And they each have slightly differing moves, but the general gist of the gameplay is that you move to the rhythm of the music, and the more you can keep on the beat, the more effective your attacks will be, and the better rewards you'll drop. And since the enemies also move to the music, you have to be thinking about the tune and try to counterattack the enemy based on what you already know about their patterns and what you know about the music. So if you're a Zelda fan and you're a huge fan of the Dark World, then if you really know how the Dark World sounds, then you can be like, ba-da, up, ba-da, ba-da, up, down, right, left, and the soundtrack is amazing. It actually wasn't composed by a Japanese person, making it the first time Western influence has affected the soundtrack of a Zelda game. Also, the graphics have a nice mixture between A Link to the Past and Skyward Sword. The soundtrack is amazing, and there's plenty of options in case you don't like the base game. There's a 2-player mode, there's a leaderboard, there's a permadeath mode where you have to start the whole game over again if you die. The map is randomly generated, well, procedurally generated to be more accurate. So in other words, you have essentially a different game every time you play. It's tragically short, and I don't really like how they handled the items. But this is definitely a huge stepping point as far as Nintendo's willingness to experiment with their franchises more. The price is pretty reasonable, and any fan of rhythm game would be doing themselves a disservice not to pick this up. And in case you're holding up your hand and saying, "But Paul, I have no rhythm bone in my body," fear not. There's a no beat mode where you can take your sweet time, but the catch is that the enemies will move based on your moves instead of to the music. So then it becomes essentially a different game altogether. I might have to retry that game now. That sounds pretty cool, actually. All right, number 50. I might have to turn off the stream pretty soon if I start running out of drinks, because my voice is starting to get a little bit tired. But as long as there's at least one person watching, then I will keep going. Number 50, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker. Now, I'm specifically referring to the 3DS version of it, because there's one for the Wii U, the Switch, and the 3DS. And I thought the 3DS, if I hadn't known better, was the original system this was released on, because it felt like it was perfectly optimized for the 3DS hardware. For starters, the game simultaneously displays 3D graphics on 2 screens. And when you're on the touch screen, you can do stuff like freeze the enemies in place, you can rotate contraptions. And then on the top screen, you can even have 3D visuals. Yeah, that's right. A 3DS game in 2018 that has 3D. No. It has all of the content, well, most of the content from the Wii U version. This is where hardcore fans might be a little bit annoyed, because it features the main game, but then you get into the post game and they removed all of the 3D world levels and replaced them with levels based on Super Mario Odyssey. Which, these levels are great. Very well designed. They have the original music for Mario Odyssey, which was super cool for me because I didn't have a Switch at the time, nor did I have Odyssey. And so when I heard like these Switch quality tunes on the 3DS, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. But it would have been nice to have 3D world levels. Maybe it was too taxing on the 3DS hardware. I don't know. And if you wanted to just get straight to those levels, if say you were only renting the game and you had already played the Wii U version, you're like, I don't want to play the same game again. If you had a Mario Odyssey amiibo, let me see if I have one on hand that I could use as an example. That's going to take too long. Well, you could do that. You could just pop in one of those and you'd get straight to the Odyssey levels. There were also Pixel Toad missions where you could search the level for a toad and then tap on them with the touchscreen. I haven't even talked about the basic gameplay yet. You basically play as Toad, but he has such a heavy backpack that he can't jump. So you have to navigate these diorama-like levels that are based on the engine of Super Mario 3D World, but without the ability to jump, meaning that even Goombas are terrifying to you because you can't jump on them. You can throw turnips at them, or you can land on them from an upper platform, but it forces you to really think about the geometry of the level and creatively find a way to get to the end goal with a more, I guess, horizontal focus. It's pretty unique and amazing concept. Would I recommend the 3DS version over the Switch version? Heck yeah. Not only does the TV mode force you to use motion controls, but the 3DS version has stereoscopic 3D. It still looks gorgeous. And the touchscreen just seems better suited to the action than a motion controller. Sure, the Switch version has DLC, but get the whole game just for DLC? No thanks. Number 49. Lego City Undercover. I really feel bad that I never picked up the Wii U version because I was scared off by the fact that it seemed like a Grand Theft Auto ripoff. Even though it was published by Nintendo and it had Nintendo Easter eggs if you knew where to look, I still wasn't really thrilled on the whole concept of stealing people's cars. So when it came to the Switch, I decided to give the game another shot. And I'm really glad that I did, because playing a game wherever you want, it like I don't know if the rest of you feel this way, but it feels like that's like the definitive way to play a game is like anywhere, be it on the TV, on your bed. Yeah, it sort of doubles the value of a game in my opinion. So the Switch version doesn't add too much. It basically just adds a multiplayer mode because now it's not relying on the gamepad for a lot of its gimmicks. And that's about it. Honestly, it's more or less a substandard port with multiplayer added, and anything that was gamepad specific is now tailored to fit a single screen experience. So the game itself is an open world Lego game, if you ever thought that was possible, where you play as an undercover cop called Chase McCain. And since you're only playing as one guy, as opposed to like tons of characters like you are in other Lego games, Chase switches between different costumes to give him different abilities. So he might switch between a farmer, a firefighter, a robber. You can also grab pretty much anything you see that moves in the city and use it to drive around. The city is humongous, probably about the size of the Great Plateau in Breath of the Wild, and maybe even a little bit more. There's tons and tons of side quests and collectibles. The game has full voice acting, very good voice acting too, and a lot of references to popular culture. While the game does have occasional linear moments when you get to a story section, the game gives you plenty of time in between those sections to explore and take the game at your own pace. There's not too much of the island that is barred off from you at first. Sure, there are certain side quests that you have to wait to get until you have another ability, but if you want to go all the way to the other end of the island, you pretty much can. And the fact that this is a Lego game, in fact, this is the only Lego game on my list, shows that you shouldn't be fooled by the bricky aesthetic. You really ought to give this game a try. It's kind of on the easy side. Like, you can't really die. If you run out of hearts, you kind of just respawn like a couple of feet away and just lose some of your currency. But currency is so easy to find that it doesn't really feel that penalizing. There's also cheat codes. And if you enter in cheat codes, then you can do stuff like make the music Christmas themed, have big heads, have people burping when you ring your phone. So overall, the game has a lot of sense of fun and humor. I guess I would say the humor is a huge reason why the game is so great in the first place. Okay, number 48. Someone here has to have played this one. Super Smash Bros. Melee. It seems like a crime to put the Super Smash Bros. Games fairly low, but over the years, Melee's appeal has sort of dwindled on me, especially because it has such amazing sequels. Melee's speed is, of course, untouched, but it's also faster to die because it seems like you get sent flying at much lower hit percentages. Also, it has some baffling design decisions, like why did they include Pichu at all? Also, what's the deal with locking being able to take pictures to putting a controller in the fourth slot, plus having a separate memory card in? But overall, Melee still has a lot of refinements to the series that the Smash Brothers games have only expanded upon to this day. It had a mostly fully orchestral soundtrack, trophies, an event mode, an adventure mode, which granted didn't have much of a story, but it was still a step in the right direction to make Smash Brothers feel more like a single-player experience. Melee also had some really incredible graphics for its time, and was, I guess, really a showcase of, guess what? All this extra space on the GameCube is going to let us add a ton more content to the game. Nowadays, Melee may seem kind of small in comparison, but back then, this game was huge. And like every single song from its soundtrack made its way into Ultimate. So if you're like, ooh, Paul, I want to hear all this fully orchestrated goodness, just go play Ultimate. You'll get it. Now, some people are going to prefer Melee's mechanics over other Smash games because this is by far the most competitively oriented Smash game. And for that, okay, sure, you're allowed to have your own opinion. Just don't talk down on people that don't like Melee because it's too competitive, because there are people that play games differently. And Smash Brothers has always been, even since Smash 64, about options. There are options to turn on all items. There are options to turn off the items. You play how you want. So, I may think Melee is the second worst Smash Brothers game next to Smash 64, but if you think it's great, good for you. Maybe that's a testament to how much the team put thought into trying to make each game unique instead of making it a port. Cool. Alrighty. Number 47, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, Sharp FE. That is weird to type because the sharp section is the same symbol as the number on my keyboard. This has to be one of the most unmarketable titles I have ever seen. Like, what is this even trying to convey? Sure, one could argue if you take the first letters of Tokyo Mirage Sessions and put them backwards, it spells Shin Megami Tensei. But would you know that this was a Shin Megami Tensei game just looking at it? You probably wouldn't. You'd probably think, oh no, this is a whole bunch of obnoxious J-pop. And yes, the game is fully voiced, but they didn't have an English localization for the voice actors. And they don't even have subtitles in the battles. So unless you really know Japanese, it's one of the few games where I kind of wish it had stayed silent. And in fact, pretty early on in my playthrough, I just turned the voice acting off altogether. It also has a lot of Japanese culture. So if you do not like how Japanese people act, you're probably not going to like Tokyo Mirage Sessions. However, if you are a fan of the Paper Mario style of turn-based battles, you're in for a really good time. Sure, this game came out really late into the Wii U's life, and so as a result, the sales were atrocious, but the reviews were stellar, and for good reason. This is an extremely great game. It's not the best Fire Emblem game per se. If anything, the Fire Emblem is kind of pushed in there as more of an afterthought. But if you look at it as its own game, it's pretty gorgeous. I mean, sure, in the towns, all the NPCs that you don't talk to are colored silhouettes, and that feels kind of lazy. But the battles are, how do I word this? You basically have to exploit the enemy's weakness. And then if you can keep doing the weakness over and over again, you trigger a chain session, which honestly looks beautiful in motion. And if you took this as a Fire Emblem game, this is by far the most gorgeous game in the series. The music is, depends on how much you like J-pop. But overall, the strategy is a lot of fun. Persona fans should get a huge kick out of the battle system. It can be a bit suggestive at times, but at least it's nowhere near as bad as the Japanese version. And overall, if you can look past the extremely over-the-top anime, you're in for a surprisingly good time. And there's going to be a Switch remake coming out in January, so maybe that can be your chance to give this game a shot. So I'm going to end the stream right now because I'm not only running out of throat energy, but this has already been going on for 2 hours. Sheesh. So, if I'm able to stream again, which we'll see, depends on my schedule, I'll finish the list. So, for anyone joining in late, I really hope you will let me know what games I've reviewed that really resonate with you. You think it should have been higher, you think it should have been lower. Ooh, Paul, what games am I missing on your list? I bet you can probably predict the rest of it, honestly. And until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and hope you'll still be with me when I review 300 games. Bye-bye.